you going on Romans 14 a little bit, and I appreciate him doing that. I'm probably going to kind of play devil's advocate with Romans 14 a little bit this morning. So, Romans 14, Paul's been talking to he's been talking to the Jews, talking to the Gentiles. We've been through Romans, we've looked at this, and he really been telling the Jews, you need to look more like the Gentiles, quit doing your Jewish thing, start looking more like your Gentile brothers and sisters. This church is varied, right, as most churches are. But, of course, in Romans, we're talking about doctrinal differences between Judaism and Christianity. We're talking about what the Jews still wanted to do, days, weeks, feasts, what the Gentiles wanted to do. But of course, we take this, as we should, and we transpose it onto us, right? What do we hold to be accountable? Where do we draw the line in the sand? Brent talked some about that last week, talked about divisions within the church of Christ. We all kind of know maybe some of those divisions. Brethren who believe only using one cup, non-institutionalized. We call non-institutionalized churches who don't believe in having kitchens in the church, churches who don't believe in Sunday school, churches who don't believe in parade preachers, churches who, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. It's hard to, I don't know how you'd be a long list, just telling you. And so, I think it's easy to sit on one side of the fence and say, well, I'm right. This is where we need to be. This is what we need to be. Y'all need to move over here, be like us. Don't judge us for being this way. And they're on the other side of the fence saying, well, y'all need to move over here and be like us. Don't judge us for being this way, So it's kind of difficult, isn't it? Because like saying, well, if you had a one-cup church, and they were like, well, you're all right with one cup, so why don't we all just use one cup, right? Why do we have to have multiple cups, Well, why don't we, right? Well, you think you need to have Sunday schools, and, you think paid preachers all right. We don't agree with that, but since you don't seem to have a problem with the way we are, why don't you just come over and be like us? Well, what I'm saying is whenever you start talking about getting along and religiously, doctrinally, you got two sides on different sides, don't you? And each of them is looking at the other one saying, well, why don't you just be like me, right? The Jews are looking at the Gentiles, so why don't you just be like us, It ain't going to hurt you to keep the Passover. It ain't going to hurt you to keep Saturday. It ain't going to hurt you to keep a few days, right? It ain't going to hurt you not to eat that bacon, right? Just be like us, right? And the Gentiles, on the other hand, are saying, well, we don't want to do that. That's burdensome and heavy to bear, and, why don't you just be like us? It's a whole lot simpler if you just be like us. So Paul kind of says, well, listen, maybe we should just not hold it against each other. Well, that's, easier said than done, obviously, right? So it's kind of hard, I guess, Romans 14. What do we allow? What do we not allow? Why are we who we are? And those are pretty tough questions if you get right down to it. I remember years ago we had a debate here in this building. Not in this building, it was actually an old building. Many, many years ago we had a debate in this about one cup, using one cup or multiple cups. That happened. I actually have a VHS tape of it somewhere. We actually had a debate about that, what should you do, right? Which is right, which is wrong? Well, that kind of helped. Gary and Donna came after that, started coming after that. It changed some minds. Debates aren't a bad thing necessarily. It's good to be able to debate something we don't do much anymore, debate God's word in public. There's nothing wrong with that. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, we have things that we kind of hold to be important to us, and other people have things they kind of hold to be important to them. And, can we ever really be united? And the answer to that question is no. I don't know how else to say it. There's just not a way to make everybody be on the same page. Wish there was, but my opinion is, I think the centuries have proven it out. It's never going to happen, right? So how do we take Romans 14? What does it mean to me and you? Looking at us. Well, Paul talks about food here, talks about days, which to us is not really a big thing. I mean, that's not really something that divides any of us, I don't think. Food, days. I mean, I think if you get outside, there's Messianic Jews, Messianic Christians that, that if we had discussions with them about this, that might apply. Days, they still hold days, they still keep Passover, they still want to keep the Sabbath. We have groups around us that want to worship on Saturday, so, that could be something we can talk about. But, most of the time, that's not something that really is much in our face, is it? Something that we really, but what's the overall point of Paul here, And I think there's something else we have to kind of look at when you read Romans, and you kind of have to keep in mind with Romans 14, is that, Paul was moving them to knowledge. And maybe you don't see that so much in Romans 14. Maybe you see Paul trying to just get them to exist together. But, if you read Corinthians, Paul gets pretty harsh. He's about the idea that you need to understand what you're doing. You need to, knowledge as a part, to be on the same page. You need to be open to the idea that you could be wrong, right? I mean, I think we all need to be open to that idea. And, the truth is, there's things that I would be all right with us doing here, personally. But I think if we did some of those things, some of you would leave. So unity always has a place in Christianity. Of course, you do one thing, some people might leave, another thing, other people might leave, So knowledge has to play a part. We have to come to an agreement. We have to come to some knowledgeable base, logical base for what we are, who we are, what we believe, how we worship, what holds us together. If you were to bring something else in to make a change, then some people would leave. Do you agree with that? Some people would probably leave. I can't do that anymore. I can't worship like that. I can't be a part of this. This isn't right. Right? Well, why would they do that? Would it be because it's scripturally wrong, doctrinally wrong, or would it be because maybe that's just not how they want to be, The truth is that I can't change what you want not to be changed if that's the way you want it. I don't know, that's probably the stupidest thing I ever said. I can't change. If you really are set in one way, I can't change you. Do you agree with that? Regardless of how much I show you, how much I prove to you, how much I cannot change you, you see? You can only change you, you see? And that's always a problem I think we run into, is that we raised up a certain way. Well, I wasn't raised up this way, but we come into this way, or we're raised up in a way, and we hold to that as being right. And sometimes we never back off and really ask ourselves the tough questions, Is that really right? Is that wrong? Is it something I could be free to think about another direction? Or is it something that I have to be set in? What validates my set of beliefs? What validates my theology? Is it me? Is it tradition? Is it history? Or is it really that I can look at the Bible and say, hey, it says it right here. The problem we have, right, is that a lot of stuff the Bible doesn't say right there. Do you agree with that? A lot of stuff it doesn't say right there, So we have to come up with this doctrinal thesis, is what I call a hermeneutic. How do we look at the Scripture? How do we divide that up, and how do we come to a conclusion about what we will do or what we won't do or what we'll be a part of or not be a part of. Those are things that we have to study, things we have to look at, and things that we're never going to come, maybe never going to come to a complete consensus just because of our humanity, I think. But I think Paul says some things we can accept, and some things we need to learn to get along, you know. Some things maybe not, I'm sure, but some things we need to accept. I think the interesting thing, and I'm just kind of going to stay kind of in the Church of Christ basis here, but I think the interesting thing within the church is that it's always been to me like where we, you know, it's kind of like a one-way valve, you know. Of course, I'm kind of a mechanic, but it's kind of like a one-way valve, you know. If you go to the very conservative, and let's use that word, I guess, this morning, very conservative most section of the Church of Christ that says, all right, we're going to use one cup, we're not going to have Sunday school classes, we're not going to have kitchens, we're not going to have paid preachers, we're not going to do any of that stuff. Most conservative church you could find, you know. Are those still my brothers and sisters? Do I still think they're going to go to heaven? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. You know? Well, let's go one step. See, take a step. So we take a step over. So we got a multi-cup church that has, but they say, you know, we don't believe in paid preachers, right? No kitchens in the building. You know, we might have a Sunday school class, right? Then you go to like the next step up, right? Then the next step up, right? Then you get maybe to us. You know, well, we're multi-cup, right? Have Sunday school classes. We're all right with paying preachers. We're all right with supporting orphans' homes. We're all right with, you know, a lot of things that all these are not all right with, right? And we're good with us, and we're good with all them. We think all them, you know, even though they don't necessarily agree with us, you know, it's okay. They're still my brothers and sisters, right? But they don't think that about us, you see. You see, it's like a one-way valve. It goes one direction, right? But on the other hand, there's Church of Christ that are more liberal than us. Am I right? There's Church of Christ that let women serve on communion, that let women lead prayers, that still don't use instruments. I've been to those churches, right? They're all right with us, but we might not be all right with them, right? And then there's maybe Church of Christ that do all that and use instruments, right? And they're okay with us, but see, we're not all right with them. See, it's like a one-way valve, you see. The more you're on this side of it, the more you're not going to put up with this side, but when you're on this side's still okay, you see. And so, you know, so even within us, not even getting outside of what I would say Church of Christ, even within us, there's huge divisions, right? Huge divisions. So, you know, can we worship together? Well, I guess that depends on what you were going to do in your worship service, right? I mean, if you were going to go worship the way they wanted you to worship, then yeah, I guess we'd all be okay, right? But if you're not, then we probably wouldn't be all right. So it's pretty difficult, isn't it? Asking ourselves where we sit in the scheme of all this and why we sit where we sit. Good question, right? Excellent question. You know, why do we think it's important enough to have Sunday school class that we think that's not worth not having it so somebody would come worship with us? Where do we draw that in the scheme of things, you see? So I guess it's easy to look at it, and I think it's easy to be kind of self-righteous when you look at it. Like, I'm all right with me, and if everybody was like me, then it'd all be okay. But you got to understand, all them other people are thinking the exact same thing you're thinking. I'm all right with me, and you know, if they were like me, everything would be okay, right? So, you understand what I'm trying to say here? So it's easy to kind of have this kind of self-righteous attitude, right? As long as you're like me, we're all right. But if you're not like me, then, well, probably it's not going to work out. So it's difficult, right? Why did we decide at some point, or why did they decide at some point, or why did the people in Rome decide at some point that it's important enough that we're going to draw this line? Well, that's probably where church history comes into the picture, Oh, sure. I mean, you can make this go as broad as you want it to go.
I deal with Sunday worship every day of my life. Saturday worship, Sunday worship. I deal with, they're scripturally baptized, but they still believe in gifts. I have some people that in our family that believe you can confess into salvation. Baptism is not necessary. And they believe in gifts also. Where do you draw the line?
Well,
something I deal with every day of my life.
Well, I think that there's places I think you have to draw the line in the sand, I mean, I think when you talk about baptism for salvation and you talk about, what gets you into the church leadership, autonomy of congregations. I mean, I think those things are set forth in the Scripture. To me, those are like non-negotiables, I think any logical person that opens the Bible and looks at it is going to come to that conclusion. I don't know how you can't, To me, it's just kind of a set in stone deal, I guess it comes down to where, you're going to draw that line. Where does Christ expect us to draw the line? Where did Paul draw the line? Did Paul draw the line? Is there a place where Paul drew the line? Yeah, sure he did. And the truth is, if you look at Galatians, you look at Ephesians, he really starting to push these people one direction. I think when you look at Romans at this point, he's saying, okay, you Jews, you Gentiles, I just want you to kind of stay in the same room. I mean, if you'll just kind of stay in the same room, I'm pretty good with it. But when you get to Galatians and Ephesians, he's like, listen, you've got to get rid of these days. You've got to get rid of this Judaism. You've got to quit this. This is not who you are, So he definitely he's shifting the direction. I don't think Paul at this point is saying, okay, let's keep you in the same room. But I also think if you read the rest of Paul's letters, you're going to see that at some point he's going to say, I just don't want you in the same room anymore. I want you on the same page, So I think there is a shift in this as you go through Paul's letters. Paul pushes more and more to the idea that I want you on the same page. I want you in the same place. I want you to be the same kind of people. Here, he is just trying to get them to stay in the room together at this particular point, right? Sometimes you got to start somewhere, right? Sometimes you got to start somewhere. So, I think when you look at your faith, who you are, what you believe, why you think you need to worship in a certain way, or why you think you need to be saved in a certain way, I think the ultimate question comes down to what's the basis of your doctrine, what's the basis of your faith. If you scripturally can support what you do and you're okay with that, then I think you're in a good place. If you're someplace because, well, that's what mom and daddy always did, or that's the way I was raised up, and anything else has got to be wrong, I probably have an issue with that philosophy, because I think we have to come to some doctrinal basis to be able to say, this is what I do, this is why I do it. And I think we have to be able to debate our point. I think we have to be able to make a case for what we believe. I think we do. And I think if we can't make an honest case for what we believe, then maybe we need to reevaluate what we believe. So I think that you have to be able to make an honest case. And Paul says in the end, we all stand before the Lord. Isn't that kind of what he says in Romans 14? In the end, whatever we do, God's going to judge it. We all stand before God, right? And that's universal. So we have to kind of think about why we do it and what we could allow, what we could not allow, where we're going to judge, where we're going to draw the line. You can't judge, but you have to judge. And and that's a hard point in Scripture, isn't it? Judge that shall be not judged, and yet you have to judge. And the Bible backs that. You have to do it, but you need to judge in a righteous way. You need to judge in a doctrinal way, and that's something you and I have to be able to defend ourselves. We're all going to stand before God in the end, every one of us. What's God going to say? Should have got along better? You're a little petty, maybe. I don't know. That's something we have to determine. How's God going to judge, what we do? Every knee shall bow, right? Every one of us will give an account. So, individually, speaking individually, each one of us has to give an account to God for what we do, for how we act, for how we worship, for who we are. Why did you do it that way? What was your motivation? Why did you do it the way that you did it? Why did you worship the way you worship? Well, I think those are valid questions. I'm at a place in my life, I wasn't raised in the church. I was raised way different than this. I came here because I thought this was better. I made that decision. This was a better way. I still stand by my decision. It took me 2 years to come to that decision. It wasn't something that was easy for me to do. I studied a lot. I looked at other churches. I looked at other faiths, not just other churches. I looked at Islam. I looked at Buddhism. I looked at Hindu. I looked at other faiths. I looked at other denominations. I looked, why do they do that? Why do they do what they do? Right? And I made a decision at that particular point in my life that this was the rightest I could find. And that's a terrible word, rightest. Probably a better word for that. Anyway, but I made a decision at that time that was it. But the interesting thing is, when I made this decision to become a member of the Church of Christ, I made a decision to be baptized, and I made a decision that, this is where I was going to worship. I, at that time, really didn't know that there were divisions within the Church of Christ. I really didn't know there was such a thing. You got to remember, I think we're kind of religiously ignorant. I know I was. Maybe I still am. I don't know. First time I ever walked into this building, this old building over here, many, many years ago, it was like 1981, right, before I was ever married. First time I ever walked into this building, old building. I remember, used to go this way. Y'all remember the old building? And I sat down in the back there, and the first thing, of course, I noticed was there was no music. I was raised in cathedrals and in the Baptist church with choirs and solos and music ministers, and I was part of the youth choir in the Baptist church when I was a kid, and that's how I was raised, And it's really funny to me because when I walked into the church for the very first time with Susie, she'd been to church with me at the Baptist church, and when I walked the very first time, and I thought, it's really interesting, this is a pretty nice building. I wonder why they can't afford a piano, I had no idea that there was such a thing as people who believed you could worship without. I didn't know that existed. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't even know that was something. Had no idea. That people really believed it was wrong to worship with an instrument. I had no idea of that. And it's really funny that when you're on this side of it, to you, you would have a hard time believing in your mind that anybody on the outside would not know that we don't use instruments in worship. You would have a hard time. If you was raised here and you believe, you would have a hard time believing. But I promise you with all my heart, I promise you, if you went out on Main Street to Henrietta with a survey card tomorrow and said, do you believe there's churches who believe that it's wrong to worship without an instrument? I promise you, 70 or 80, maybe 90% of the people on that street would say they had no idea that that was even a thing. Do you agree with me? I promise you it's true. I promise you it's true. You see, the problem is we think everybody knows how we believe. Everybody knows how we worship. Everybody knows. No, they don't. They don't. They don't know. Okay? Just like I didn't know. I was raised sitting in a pew my entire life. I had no clue. I had no clue. You know, I was raised in the cathedral, Catholic cathedral. You know, I saw them take communion, closed communion, every Mass. They would line up down the aisle. They would take communion every week. Right? I went to the Baptist church after Mass. We never took communion over there. Right? I don't remember that church ever taking communion. Right? I didn't think anything about it. I didn't know there were people who thought, well, we need to take communion every first day of the week. I had no clue. You can be religious and be ignorant. Do you agree with that? You can be religious and be ignorant, you know? And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's kind of this story. I'm going to share this story with you because I think it's so, I think I can share this with you. These people are dead. So I think it's safe. I can share this story with you. But remember when we had the Wednesday night dinners? Remember that? And we had the Wednesday night dinners here. And, you know, we had a lot of people, you know, and we'd have 150 people, you know, come for dinner. And I would pick the kids up at school, right? I would pick the kids up from school, and they would get on the bus. And, of course, a lot of those kids, well, my kids, you know, Shannon, Sydney, Nick, you know, all those kids, they all played in the band, right? Well, I didn't take them home, right? I just picked them up from school. So when they got on the bus at school, they had everything they had at school. They had their guitar, their clarinet or whatever. They had their books. They had their backpack. They had whatever they had. And so I bring them here and drop them off, you know. They'd all come in here. Well, a lot of them would go upstairs and play their instruments or whatever, you know, up in the teen room. And that kind of caused a little bit of a stir, you know, and I kind of had to kind of put that fire out a little bit, you know. But then the real thing came down is I had somebody that came to me and said, we're going to quit coming because, you know, those kids carry those instruments out on Wednesday night and people are going to think we're using instruments in here. I had somebody actually tell me that. This is a true story. I said, we don't think we can come here anymore because you know, we can't have those kids carrying them instruments out of this building on a Wednesday night because we think that people in the community are going to think that we worship with instruments. And I thought, what do you do about that? You know? What am I supposed to do? Tell the kids, leave your instruments on the bus, or I'm going to have to take you home before I take you to church because I can't offend somebody? I can't, you know, is that what I need to do? Is that how I handle it? How would you handle it? You got members of the congregation that have been here that are saying, I can't, you know, we can't worship here if you're going to let kids carry instruments out of the building. Huh? Is that the right thing to do, though? Is that where we draw the line and say, you know, I can't make this work, and that, you know, is that the line I'm going to, you know, you look at Romans 14, you say, this doesn't apply to us. Absolutely. Absolutely it applies to us. How do you handle a situation like that? What do you do?
Maybe explain to them the bus you picked them up in. I don't know.
You know, I sat down and I really had an honest conversation with them. And I says, you know, honestly, I'm going to tell you, 95% of the people in this town don't know that we don't use instruments anyway. Really doesn't make a difference. Right? And if they really bothers them, then hopefully we'll have a chance to teach them. Right? Hopefully we'll have a chance to, you know. And in the end, I said, I think the only person in the end this is really offending is you. It's not offending anybody else. Right? It's offending you. Well, they stayed. I mean, we were able to work through it. But I'm just saying that where do you draw that line, you know? We got to love each other. right? I mean, that's the number one thing. You got to love each other, right? You know, we're family. And families, you know, when your kids turn the stereo up in their room, that might really irk you, right? But, you know, you're either going to explain to them they're going to turn it down, or you're going to live with it, or you're going to work through it. You're not going to kick them out of the house because they turn the stereo up, right? You're going to find a solution. Well, so many times in the church, that's what we have to do. We have to find solutions that work, you know, to keep us together, to unify us. And maybe that's what Paul's saying in Romans 14. It's a real thing in any church in the world. It's a real thing. Churches divide over the most ignorant things on earth, you know. Churches divide over the most ignorant things on earth. Yeah.
This is kind of harsh, but our people in our church, have, especially us older people, have grown up with what our parents thought and believed. And sometimes when you say, this isn't, let me show you in the Bible, they don't want to know. They don't want you to show. It's like, no, this is the way it should be. It's wrong to bring instruments in it. And it's like, but I can prove to you in the Bible. No, they don't want to hear that because they don't want to change. And I've gone through with that. I've seen that. And that's where it becomes very difficult. It's like they just, I was raised this way, and I believe they want to change.
It's a mentality that we have to get past as grown-ups. It's a mentality. You know, it's easy, it's really funny when we talk about this building and everybody says, oh, this is just a building, right? You know, and that's true. Do y'all agree with that? This is just a building. Sheetrock and paint. You agree with it? Everybody in here agree with that? Okay? So, Tuesday night, I'm going to have a band come play some religious music up here. How many of you got a problem with that? So is it just a building? Are you really telling me it's just a building? Interesting story, another true story. I had a VBS here many years ago. Most of them people are dead now too. It's interesting. I'm old enough I can tell stories because people have died. I never thought I would be that old. But we had a VBS here one time, and we had a band from Oklahoma Christian, a group, not a band. They're a group from Oklahoma Christian. And they're a group that does like these little funny songs and skits, and they use instruments, you know. They're not a band, so to speak, but they just kind of do these skits and these little funny songs and stuff. So we had them come all the way over from Edmond for this vacation Bible school, all the way over. And they said, well, you know, are we going to do this, whatever? And I said, well, let's just do it in here. Wrong answer, right? So about 60% of the people weren't good with doing it in here because we had instruments. So I said, well, let's do it in the fellowship hall. Well, I was down to about 20% that was not okay with that, right? Couldn't do it in the fellowship hall. It was really bad to do it in here. It was a little less bad if we did it in that room over there. That was a little better. So finally I said, well, let's just do it in the gazebo. Everybody was okay with that. It's okay there, right? But it's not okay here, and it's really not okay here, but yet this is just a building, right? You see, you know, so I guess what I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm really not. Probably am, but I'm really not trying to. What I'm trying to say is that in our brain, in this brain, right, this is more than a building. You might say it's just a building, but in your brain, it's more than that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a problem with me saying, let's put a country band in here on Tuesday night, right? So when we talk about faith and religion and doctrine and God and Christ and worship and all those things, yeah, there's things in our brain we have a hard time moving past. And it's really funny because if we rented the Civic Center to have worship over there, just as an example, Tornado comes by, rips our building up, right? So we say, well, we're just going to rent the Civic Center on Sundays until we can get our building built back. It's funny to me that we would be okay with being in the Civic Center worshiping. Would y'all be all right with that? We'd all be all right with that, wouldn't we? I mean, we used to worship over in this. We'd be fine with that. And we'd be fine with them using that Civic Center for everything else. But it wouldn't be here. Now, there's a basis for that. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a basis for that. Because we want people to understand what we believe and what we think. And we understand that if we do things in here that maybe don't go along with doctrinally what we think, that people in the community, people that come in might think, well, they're different than that, right? They're okay with that. I mean, we're not okay with that. I understand that. I understand that mentality 100%. I do. I totally get that. I understand that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that Paul in Romans 14 was saying, listen, you have a lot of things that you don't necessarily see eye to eye on, but you don't need to let that divide you if it's stuff that's acceptable, stuff that doesn't matter, you know? But the problem is most churches divide over stuff that really doesn't matter. We choose some really bad hills to die on in the church. We really, really, really do. And we need to really watch ourselves about that. So I think that's maybe application for us. You're more than welcome to throw things at me or whatever. I'm good. Jump in here anytime you want, you know. But the way we think, the way we process, the way that what we hold to be sacred and holy, are things in our side of us that you just can't flip a switch. I understand that. I totally 100% understand that. And I would never ask people to do that. Change is slow, and change has to be planned and plotted, and it has to be, and the groundwork has to be laid, and teaching has to be done, and understanding has to be, love has to be applied to get to where God wants us to be as a group, as a people. Paul doesn't expect them to be different forever. That's not what this is about. Paul expects them to stay together until they get together. Does that make any sense? Paul expects them to stay together until they get it together. You know?
Everybody that considers themselves a Christian today in any denomination has justification for their belief. So who are your true brothers and sisters in Christ? And maybe that's a conversation for private.
Oh, I don't think it is. I think it's pretty straightforward, you know.
If you're baptized into Christ properly, are you a brother and sister? That's kind of the way I look at it. And if you believed on a baptism any other than we were taught, you're not.
Yeah, that's pretty much kind of where I think you draw. You know, I think if you're baptized for the remission of your sins into the body, you're in the body. You know, I think that's always kind of what I've preached and what I believe. Can we worship wrong, still go to heaven? You know, I think worship can be unacceptable, for sure. I think worship can be, you know, hard discussion, right? Where do you draw the line on salvation, you know? You know, I think it's not my decision in the end. That's where I stand. You know, it's not my decision to judge your salvation. It's my obligation to teach you the truth to the best of my ability. That's my obligation. It's my obligation to present to you the truth to the best of my ability. And if you are going to stand before God, not me. I will if I don't teach you the truth to the best of my ability, the best of my knowledge. Then, yeah, I'm going to be accountable to that. But at that point, you know, you have decisions that you have to make. You have to decide if that's true or not, or how you're going to do that, or how you're not going to do that. You ultimately have to make that decision. we will all stand before Christ. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. And I hope when we do, we're able to stand before him as people who are humble and are loving, and people who have obeyed what he tells us to do to the best of our ability. But in the end, it's a decision that we have to make individually. I'm here because I choose to be here. Nobody makes me be here. I wasn't raised here. Nobody, I'm not here because my family came to church here, because my family went to church someplace else. When I came to church here, I went different. My family went someplace else. So I'm not here because my family didn't come with me. My wife came with me. She's my best family. But my other family did not come with me. They stayed exactly where they were. And when I tried to talk to them about what I did, why I changed, why I came here, you know what they told me? They said, I'm comfortable with what I believe. Don't try to change me. So I don't stand before you as somebody who hasn't made decisions religiously in my life. I have. And I decided to be here. So take that how you will. You know? I hope that gives me perspective, you know? But I think that Christ wants us to come together in worship. I think he wants us to be one. I just don't think it's attainable. I'm just being honest, you know. I just don't think it's attainable. I wish it was. I wish we could all get together in a big room and we could all debate until we all agreed that this is the one way, the only way, and we're all going to. But you and I both know that's never, ever going to happen, right? We know that's never, ever going to happen. So we got to take care of ourselves. We got to preach the truth, teach the truth, live the truth to the best of our ability, be the truth of Christ. And we have to try to change the people in the world around us and not worry about the grand scheme of things. Let God worry about that, you know. Worry about you and about the people that are close to you and the people that are around you and the things that you can affect. Because the truth is, just as in my life, a lot of people are just going to tell you, we're not going to change, right? Why don't you change? Why don't you be like me? Well, I hope you have enough knowledge to say this is why I'm where I'm at. You know? I don't know. This class probably didn't help you a lot, but I think I paddled real hard, but the dinghy didn't move very far. But we'll work some more on it. Thanks for your time.